Ciao everyone, today we're going to talk about what nonlinear summing can do to your mixes. I left a link down in the description from where you can get access to this incredible plugin and take advantage of the Cyber Monday sales that Waves are doing. I've partnered up with Waves to bring you to the table my expertise plus their incredible plugins, and we're going to be deconstructing some of the mixes that I've done and understand how some of their extremely famous and popular plugins work in order to make your song become a hit. Before we start, let's define a bit why do we use summing. Now with Summing Mixer, we can actually bring out the full potential of our mixes. And the secret recipe of these magic boxes stands within their non-linearity. Now, one of the greatest things about digital, it's also one of its biggest flaws, which is imprinting to sound linearity, extremely transparent and often resulting sterile sound, which is not exactly what we aim for when we mix music, right? We're trying to convey an emotion, we're trying to thicken it up the sound. And so in order for us to work in the box and still retaining the exact same advantages of when we were using analog console, Summing Mixer came into the equation. Now, Summing Mixer can actually add warmth, punch to your mixes, letting pretty much any part of your mix to gain a specific thickness and depth. Now, the beauty of this is that we could use nonlinear summing on separate tracks as well as to the overall track. So we can work at a micro level and yet at a macro level, imprinting a bit of this analog domain texture to the entire mix. Now, Summing Mixer varies, of course, widely based on functionalities. You know, there are some simple mixers and yet some other summing mixer which add and love to combine different complexity to the signal, whether if it's total harmonic distortion, whether it's analog coloration, and that's why we're doing this. We're gonna go and deep dive into this amazing world of summing. Now, NLS stands for nonlinear summing. Now, my friends at Waves, which we have recently partnered up, have created one of the most sophisticated and truthfully nonlinear summing mixer. Now, so far, we have been dealing with the problem of how can we gain that extra bit of texture when we mix in the digital domain. So this video is for all of you that technically do not have access to a full equipped recording studio and yet are looking forward to add a bit of texture to the sound. Now, as I said before, NLS, nonlinear summing, delivers the richness and complexity that only analog gear was capable of doing so far. Now, my friends at Waves worked so meticulously to provide us not only with one of the greatest analog summing mixer that we have at our disposal within the digital world, but they have sampled three legendary consoles: the SSL 4000G, the EMI 12345 Mark II, and the Neve 5116. Now, along with each single channel or input channel, they've also sampled the master bus. So imagine this, right now, we have not only at our disposal each single input level distortion, so to speak, of an SSL 4000G, an EMI, and a Neve. But along with that, we can combine it with their respective master bus. And the beauty of all of this is that we can mix match them. What does it mean? Well, it means that, let's say some console, let's say Neves, work really great on percussions because they add that extra thump, that extra layer of thickness. But perhaps we would like to mix vocals passing through a console that adds a bit more mid-range to the signal, an SSL. Now, in the analog domain, in a real recording studio, you have access only to one flavor, maybe two flavors. At this point right now, though, we can choose, pick, and match whatever color palette works best for our sound. So imagine this, I could have within my entire mix a color palette that ranges between 3 different consoles, 3 different master bus, And on top of this, I can decide the amount of total harmonic saturation and coloration I want to imprint to the track. Incredible. Now, before moving forward, of course, I would like to shed some light a bit on how this channel works. An analogy can be made as, let's say me and you, today, we go to buy a guitar, the exact same guitar, right? Yet my guitar will sound slightly different from yours based on the cut of the wood, paint, the way that the pickups have been assembled. They're very similar, but yet different. This is exactly why well-known mixers and engineers so far are using consoles. So the way you have to picture a console, it's like a beautiful color palette, right? Each single channel, although it belongs to the exact same console and although it's built in the exact same manner, will feature different characteristic which will imprint to the sound a specific texture. I remember working on this beautiful SSL 4000E back in the days, and after sampling each single fader, I found out that channel 6 of this SSL gave me the best tonal shape for my kick drum. So instead of stemming out all my instruments starting from 1 being the kick drum, channel 1 being the kick drum moving forward, channel 6 has always been the kick drum channel due to how the analog character works. And so, as I was saying before, every time we're choosing a console, or in this case, a channel strip of a console, there are 5 parameters that generally we should keep in control. The first one is the analog character of this channel. Then each single channel provides a specific frequency response. One of the most important and colorful aspects of those are the harmonic distortion, or THD, total harmonic distortion, clipping, and noise. Now, so you might be wondering, okay, what are all of this and how do they work? Let's talk about the analog character that each single channel adds. Now, analog devices generally produce an electrical artifacts that affect frequency response, harmonics, and cause signal to clip ever so slightly to introduce a bit of that warmth and noise. Now, these artifacts is what we define as the character. Now, the character of a particular device results of a combinations of factors, which might vary based on if the technology type is being used as a vacuum tube, transistor, so on and so forth. So there are many variables that would allow us, in face of mixing, to dictate exactly what is that we want to imprint. In other words, what type of shades of color do we want to print on our signal? And this brings me to the second very important aspect of this input level distortion, if we want to call it, or nonlinearity, which is the frequency response. Now, depending on the circuit, as we're going to test it in a little bit, whether if you're using an SSL or in this case an EMI or an Eve console, depending on the circuits, the input level frequency response varies. This can result, in specific frequency being boosted or being cut. So the way you have to see this, it's a sort of like pre-EQ section, right? We are not here just playing back the music. We're tailoring the music based on our taste. Hence, it's very important for us to understand how to mix match specific features of sound with specific feature of technology. In this case, choosing the right console upon which we would like to mix low-end content instrument, high mids, so on and so forth. So this is very important because the frequency response along with the analog characteristic are going to kind of like tailor a bit the sound, smoothing it out or even making it bigger and wider. The third and most important aspect, in my opinion, is the harmonics, or THD, total harmonic distortion. So THD generally, it's a very low level based distortion that adds odds or even harmonics to the input level. And usually this is artifacts, if we want to call it artifacts, which I think it's an extremely musical artifacts, happens at a level much lower of the fundamental frequency. And usually these artifacts happens at a level which is much lower or a bit lower than the fundamental frequency. Now, the total harmonic distortion is what really characterize and introduce a little bit of depth and warmth to our signal. Along with this, we have the last two factors that are part of a channel strip, which are clipping and noise. Now, clipping is a high-level distortion, which in a way adds harmonics to the input level signal. And that level, though, it's very close to the fundamental, right? So each harmonics remains at the level close to its predecessors. And so at this point, clipping occurs on a device such as a preamplifier, which it's fed into a much and larger, stronger signal to handle. And the device in this case chops the waveform. Now, of course, we have to be very careful with this because we can produce two different effects. One that is very pleasing and very musical in a way. The other one, you run into a problem of chopping off part of the signal and pretty much destroying the waveform of a sound. Lastly, we got the noise. Now, noise occurs in analog devices due to the interaction between a power supply and a device electrical magnetic shielding properties. Now, in this case, this results in a very completely random low-level signal. Now, the noise level defines actually the dynamic depth of usable signal, which is something that we generally define and call noise to signal ratio. Okay? So after this introduction, I'm going to show you how I integrate waves and LS into my mixing template and show you the benefits of it. Now, the song that I'm about to play you, it's called Forbidden. The song was written and produced by an artist called Karen. I will highly encourage you to go and listen to him. I'm going to give you a little sneak peek of the actual mix, and then we're going to dive in how I used waves and LS.
It's hard to remember what it feels to have a heart, 'cause I'm just a young boy and I'm chained to my guitar. Power to you in a silence. Would you say this is something you like that feeling? But it's like forbidden, and you've seen it. I got powers, I got places you ain't seen. Do you like that feeling? Yeah, she is alive when she's with me. Hazy, satisfied, high.
Beautiful song, very complex. It adds a lot of real drums, percussion, synthesizer. So there is a lot going on within this song. The way I use it, NLS, or the way NLS could actually be used, are two ways. Now, you can generally use it as a virtual summing console, which is exactly how I'm using it in this specific context. So as you can see, each one of my tracks has been routed to a submix. So all my kicks are going to a kick aux, snares to my snare aux, the rest of the drums minus the toms to a drums aux, toms, bass, guitar, keys, and so forth. Now these are my buses. So I generally split kick, snare, toms, and the rest of the drums, including overheads, hats, and rooms. I have an aux for my bass, my keys, and my guitar, and of course, after my print track, an aux for my vocals. Now everything is being controlled via VCA. So for the time being, I'm gonna just mute for a minute my vocals. And so, as I was telling you before, NLS could be used, as I'm using it in this case, as a virtual summing box console. So I have pretty much split it, different group of tracks, and instead of having all of them coming out from the exact same output, what I'm doing is outputting each single track to their own input level and modifying it a bit. So in this case, NLS is inserted as the last insert on my track. Never mind that over here I added a bit of limiting. Just focus on here. So the correct procedure should have been adding it after the L2, but again, we learned the rules to break them, right? So in this case, the direct out is routed through an analog console. Now, as you can see over here, I have on my drums an instance of the Neve channel. On my bass, I have an EMI, which I love the harmonic distortion that I keep adding through the drive knob here. On my keys, I have another Neve channel. And on my guitars, another Neve. Lastly, on my vocals, I have an SSL channel. Now, in this case, the NLS, it's placed as the last plugin on top of my different stems. And now the channel here are feeding the NLS bus, which is the first channel on my mix bus. Now, what does it do? Now, right now, the NLS mix bus is placed as the first insert on my master track. And in this case, it acts as a stereo return. Now, the great thing about this is that, as you can see here, I can change based on a VCA assignment over here, 1, 2, 3, etc., the amount of total distortion via this mix bus mixer. And it's like I'm having two different levels of connection. So I have a direct micro level input on each single track. And then over here, I have my master bus, which in this case allow me to vary the level of different tracks assigned to a specific VCA. I can add or reduce the drive, and I can even trim the overall group if I want. Nevertheless, I could add noise and I can bypass it. The other way to work with NLS instead would be to instantiate NLS as the first insert on a track. Now, there's not a right or wrong. It's just understanding how we can tailor things upon our needs. Now, if I would have placed NLS, as in many cases I do, especially with synthesizer, bass, and low-end harmonic content instrument, in this case, if I do this, is to simulate a console preamp coloration. Now, in this case, the NLS is placed with the first insert of Pro Tools, my DAW, on an audio track. And in this case, it can be inserted at any point. So I could place a couple plugins before and then insert the NLS right after. Now, in this case, this allows us to pretty much use a bit more of the input saturation or drive of the signal and change it the kind of saturation between microphone or line level input. Nevertheless, we can always trim the overall input of the tracks. But now, enough of me talking. Let's go ahead and listen how this incredible plugin works. So right now what I did was soloing pretty much drums, bass, guitars, keys, okay? I'm gonna give you a little sneak peek of it. All right, I'm gonna play this section without the NLS. So as you can see and hear, especially, every time the NLS is bypassed, it's not reinventing the wheel, but yet it's adding an extra layer of thickness to the overall sound, which otherwise would be missing. The sound would be a bit too thin, a bit too transparent. And we can notice this, especially if we go ahead and solo only the guitar, the drums, and bass. Actually, that's only drums. We're using 4 instances, although it's only 3. So without, let me move them a little bit out of the way. On. Off. So as you can hear right now, we are kind of like losing the bottom end, as we were saying before. The total harmonic distortion, which gets introduced via this little drive knob, happens a bit lower than the fundamental. And in this case, we're losing all that thump from the kick drum, that smooth out of the top end of the cymbals, which in this case sounds very harsh. And we're kind of like confining the drums in a very bidimensional kind of aspect. Whereas what we want here is increase the depth, right? So how do we do this? Well, I've specifically chosen a Neve console due to the fact of what the Neve circuitry does specifically on drums and in low frequency content. Once again, let's hear actually in context only the kick and snare. With out. On. You hear the bite, so we're adding a bit of top end from the kick drum, but yet a lot of low end from the bottom of it. And the snare drum is kind of like coming to life all of a sudden. We hear the snap, we hear the body, which before, although we've mixed it in a precise and specific way, doesn't has it. Out. On. It's just night and day. And so this is generally the process that I have on my template for my drums. I always have an instance of an LS. Now, something that I want you to notice is what really makes this plugin unique. Now, the great advantage of having analog emulation is that they are emulations, right? They have figured out the right way of creating an algorithm that emulates the way that analog circuitry works. Now, this is true for a lot of plugins, but it's also a problem because right now they have only model in a lot of plugin manufacturers one single circuitry. So if you start stacking the exact same plugin times 100 tracks, you're always gonna end up with the exact same amount of total harmonic distortion. Here, if you noticed, each single track, although I'm using the exact same plugin or the exact same console, has a different number. Now, waves have sampled per each single console 32 discrete different channels. So the amount of leverage that you have to mix signals, it's humongous. You can do literally whatever you want to mix, match, and change the total harmonic distortion. So this is what makes this plugin unique in the way it introduced some sort of like non-linearities between, even in this case, 3 instances or 4 instances of the exact same plugin. Let's hear what this plugin does. And of course, I want to show you also my master bus on bass and keys. of a sudden we have this extremely beautiful low end, which is the foundation of the song, right? Which is very bass and synthy driven, which is kind of like lacking of that bottom end, that explosion of the lowest harmonic. And so right now, if we want, as I did over here, I cranked a bit more the microphone, the drive level of my bass to really bring this up, the thump and the mid-range of this incredible EMI channel. You hear how much thump we get? Now it's like redesigning and reshaping the bass, which probably has been recorded via the eye. So it's great, but somehow is lacking that extra lower harmonic and thickness, which luckily for us we can add. And I've sampled the bass via different modules. Actually, if you want, I can remove the VCA5. And right now I can let you hear the different modules on bass only. So let's get on our bass here. So let's start with the EMI. SSL. Neve. So my observation, the Neve adds a bit more low end, so a bit more thump at the bottom end, but it doesn't give me a great details of definition in the mid range. The SSL, on the other hand, it's very open, very broad. That's why I tend to use it primarily on guitars. But the EMIs, especially with the drive set at 3 o'clock, does something magic to the low end, because it doesn't not only thicken it up, the low end and the fundamentals of the bass, but it works through the whole structure of its harmonics, making also the notes being more clear and heard, which is something that it's very hard to get out of a bass guitar. Now let's see if I add a bit of mic level distortion. Now the bass start acquiring a bit more drive, but imagine using this in parallel. You can obtain an incredible synth sound and much more grit, if you may. Lastly, the noise. I don't know if you were capable of catching it, but it adds just a little extra ear candy to make the actual bass speak and define it a bit more. Now, I didn't use it in this specific mix just because I needed a bit more definition. If this was a bit more of a rock and roll mix, I would have used, as I do many times, the noise for sure. So once again, I'm going to give you a before and after our NLS on our tracks. Now what I'm going to do, instead of bypassing all my plugins here, I'm actually going to bypass the master section here. So focus on how this mix of getting extremely wide all of a sudden start shredding it down. The depth get lost every time I bypass the plugin, and the bottom end is kind of like gun. It's very unfocused. So we're going to do it first with, and then I will bypass it. So as you were able to hear, it makes a humongous difference. Because right now we're adding that non-linearity from one channel to another, adding different flavors of actual mix bus processing. And so right now we are gaining all that three-dimensional sound that a lot of engineers are after, especially when working in analog consoles. Now, if you are interested in this plugin, Waves is now running massive sales via Black Friday. So in the link down below, you're going to get a chance to actually get your hands and try or even buy via the Black Friday sales this incredible plugin. Until next time, ciao. All right, now that you see how I use Waves NLS, I'm curious to see how you're going to implement this incredible plugin in your workflow. Don't forget to hit the link down in the description from where you can get your own version of the Waves NLS. And please don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, ciao.
Power to you in a silence. Would you say this is something you like that feeling?